Welcome into the 10th edition of the Penn State Nittany Lion Podcast, Sermon on Mount Nittany. I'm Zach Saquon. Alongside of me is Tommy Butler. Welcome into all our viewers. What started so exciting didn't exactly finish as planned. Penn State, for those who don't know, Penn State dropped the instant classic. Honestly, that's going to be shown and told to many generations down the line. Penn State dropped to Ohio State 39-38 in the final minutes of the game, led the entire game all the way through up until just under 2 minutes. JT Barrett and that offense were practically unstoppable. They had 27 first downs, 529 total yards. They did have 2 turnovers, but it didn't really affect them other than keeping them down by 2 scores the majority of the game. It reminded me of the USC Rose Bowl quite a bit. Penn State, they were down in the first, they just, even though, Saquon Barkley had the 97-yard run back touchdown, first play of the game, and everyone was going crazy. And then Cole Farmer forced the fumble, and then Deshaun Hamilton scored, and then it just kind of went back and forth a little bit. Penn State was as far ahead as 18, but Ohio State just kept chipping away. They just kept chipping away, and the defense didn't really do that good of a job, and it's hard to commend the offense too. They had about 283 yards total. Barkley had 49 rushing yards on the ground. He had a rushing TD, a nice lead block by Trace McSorley. It was a good overall team effort because the defense forced 2 turnovers, special teams got involved, and the offense, when given the opportunity down in the red zone, converted most of the time except for that field goal, which plagued Penn State in the end. But Tommy, I want to know your thoughts, just like, what are your general takeaways? Whose shoulders is this really on? And is it a sign of things to come, or is it, it's just a fluke loss?
I think one of the biggest things that I noticed was the fact that Penn State took away the ball twice from the Ohio State offense. If you were to go back and look at 100 games, 98 of them, the team that has the most turnovers or gave up the most turnovers is the loser. And the fact that after all that, everything that could have gone right went right for Penn State, that's not a thing that ever happens to Penn State. As we know, with one of the last time that Ohio State beat Penn State, there was that interception that was clearly on the ground call and various things like that. Penn State had the interception in the end, or the touchdown in the end zone that was called an interception on the field and then was turned over. That stuff doesn't happen, and Penn State can't. It was incredibly disappointing to see Penn State give up that opportunity. One of the other things I noticed was, it's hard to say that it falls on one person's shoulders because everybody on the team has something to do with what happens. I think one of the biggest problems was that Penn State kept playing play action pass, and that's their identity. There's not much you can do about that. Every play is Trace McSorley looks at the defense, then looks to the sideline. What do I have to do? Do I call an audible or what? And a lot of the time, they played pass defense so Penn State would run the ball. And that ended up being runs on 3rd and long, which didn't work out. That ended up being the field goal that could have been a touchdown from the 6-yard line that would have then put Penn State in the lead for good. And there's so much positive stuff that came out of that game. The fact that it ended in such a negative way was so surprising. It's still not quite... I still can't fully believe that it happened. And I'm a Patriots fan, obviously, so I now understand what Atlanta feels like after the Super Bowl where the Patriots came back and won after being down 28-3. It's something that will stick with you for a while. But this team, I don't want to point fingers. I've wanted to point fingers earlier in the week, but now that we're heading into the next week, that's really what Penn State's about, and I don't want to do much to distract from that. So I believe that Penn State will come back from this. There's not all that much else to say. The future is coming up, and that's what Penn State's focusing on.
And so, but there was a deciding factor here. We have to talk about the defense. What happened to this number 1 defense that, or at least number 1 scoring defense, not total, but they were top 10 total defense. what did Ohio State do that was so effective?
Well, at the very beginning of the game, Ryan Buchholz was injured. That just him being a veteran player, losing him and having Shaka Tony come in, who's a very quality player, he just hasn't had that many snaps before. He was overworked by the end of the game, and that allowed them to get yardage on the ground as well as keep JT Barrett out of pressure, so to make those 16 throws in a row that he did to eventually win the game. Things like that. Troy Apke had the game of his life. I don't think anyone's going to sit down and say that Troy Apke wasn't a huge factor in the way that the game was going at the beginning, with fantastic open field tackles, crunching hits. Him and Marcus Allen both played incredibly well. The safeties were fantastic. There were a couple of problems with the cornerbacks that led to those a couple of those interceptions or touchdowns later in the game, but I think mainly it was the fact that the defensive line got tired because their offensive line is fantastic. On the other side of the ball, Penn State's offensive line had some injuries. They had Will Fries in at left tackle. He's not usually at that position. Plus the fact that he's a freshman made the offensive line much more tired than they usually are. And that, coupled with the fact that Ohio State is a brilliant defensive line, meant that anytime you handed off the ball to Saquon Barkley, he couldn't go anywhere because there were always people in his face. And anytime you had Trace McSorley drop back, he was running for his life. It's the fact that Penn State was up by as much as they were at any point was amazing and a miracle almost. The fact they came back is, as I've said before, incredibly disappointing, but that's the way the game goes. It's 4 quarters, 60 minutes. You can't play 45 minutes. And Penn State led for 58 of those 60 minutes, but that at the end of the day, that's not what matters.
And that is an excellent point. I'm glad you brought it up, that the Ryan Buchholz injury was a big deal. You know, Shaka Tony is more of a pass rushing specialist right now, but as a 19-year-old and definitely a little undersized. I don't want to say he brought up the weight again. You know, he brought up his weight a little bit, but he is easier to push off the line than Buchholz is. We can establish that and all agree. I still have to put this, 529 total yards. JT Barrett was practically unfazed, 33 for 39, 328 yards through the air, and 95 on the ground. He was all of their offense. Why didn't Penn State stop that? Well, Ohio State came in with the second overall offense in the nation. That's a lot of people overlook that. Usually defense wins championships, but offense wins games. That's something people don't really like to talk about a lot. Or it's not that they don't like to talk about it. Fails to be acknowledged most of the time. Yes, defense wins championships, but offenses are still relevant. We've seen some of the top, the best offenses make it to championships. The Falcons, with the mediocre defense, but the Patriots had a top defense and they ended up coming out on top. So in the end, I think that, Penn State needs to refine that defensive game plan. A lot of soft zone, a lot of cover two that, you were able to draw the safeties in with the play action pass and then either get someone open wide open down the middle or then run the seams up through the gaps between where the other cover two corners are. So logistically, Ohio State wasn't doing anything complicated. It was, let's see if we can get the corners and the safeties to draw in and then get them over the top. Kind of like the way Penn State does it. But the fact that it was the combination of all that, the fact that Penn State, they lost all those guys to injuries, especially Ryan Bates. If that's a long-term thing, that's a very big deal moving forward.
I believe he did come back later in the game,
okay,
but he would still be hampered from that, and we don't know going forward.
Ohio State's defensive line is one of the best I've seen. Everyone says, that offense doesn't get enough credit. That defensive line doesn't get enough credit. That is I thought Michigan's offensive line was good. Ohio State's is fantastic. So watch, it's a darn shame because now Penn State is really in a tough hole here. They can't make it back to the Big Ten championship unless Ohio State loses 2 games. They have Iowa on the road, Michigan State at home, and Michigan on the road. Some people could argue that they could lose 2 of those games, but right now they're going to be favored in all of them. They're favored against Iowa. They're favored against Michigan State. They go to the Big House, and Michigan can look to redeem themselves, because that was such a devastating blow to their college football resume. So there's some bad blood on the line here, some bragging rights. But Ohio State is still a good team, and with that, we're going to, I want to one final takeaway before we transition into the newly released college football rankings for the down when they kicked that field goal. Was there any? Did you have any problem with the play? Obviously, hindsight's 2020, but did you have any problem with the play calling at the end by James Franklin and Coach Moorhead that could have netted them a touchdown, but instead they tried to play it safe and made sure there were no turnovers? What do you agree or disagree? Obviously, hindsight's 2020, but can you reason with his mindset?
I think in the moment I was thinking one of two things. I thought the run was the correct option. I think after 2 tries and not doing very well with Trace McSorley running, Saquon Barkley might be a good idea. But I think I was thinking that you try Saquon Barkley second after you tried Trace McSorley. He got 3 yards the first time, then 1. Then Saquon got -3 to put Penn State back at the 6-yard line. If they were to go with Saquon Barkley the second time and he gets knocked back, then I think it's 3rd down, throw the ball. If you don't, then if it's not completed, then you kick the field goal anyway. If it is completed, then it's a touchdown. If it's intercepted, then the game ends the way it is. And one of the things that you have to be thinking is obviously going back to the Patriots, the other Super Bowl they played, not the other one, but Super Bowl 49, they won because the Seahawks were on the goal line and decided to throw it instead of give it to their running back. Penn State was in exactly the same position, decided to run it. It didn't work. They got 3 points and ended up losing by 1 when they could have put 4 extra points up there.
So you think they were a little predictable down at the goal line because they didn't hand it off to Barkley, and if you watch the plays, the linebackers all played towards McSorley. Barkley had the open edge, and he's definitely fast enough to get there. So was it predictable play calling, or did Ohio State just make a good stance at the goal line?
I mean, Ohio State's goal line defense, their defensive line and linebackers are just fantastic. So I think if you can't push it in the first 2 from the 3-yard line, or I guess they were at the 5-yard line, then you need to try something else. Penn State won the Iowa game by throwing a last-second desperation pass to the back of the end zone when Juwan Johnson caught it. They have so many wide receivers. One of the things that Penn State hasn't had for a long time are long, lanky wide receivers. They have Mike Gesicki. They have Juwan Johnson. They have Deshaun Hamilton, not quite as much, but still a fantastic receiver. They have all these guys. They even have Irvin Charles if they decide to put him in. Saeed Blacknall's that way. They had marched down the field. I think it's a 20-something yard pass to Gesicki, another pass to Gesicki, and then a 20-yard pass to Saeed Blacknall that put them in this position. If they throw the ball on one of those downs, it's either intercepted and the game would be over anyway, and that's hindsight, or it could be a touchdown as well, and then we wouldn't be having this conversation. At the end of the game, towards the end of the game, I definitely believe that they should have thrown the ball more, but that was where it was more surprising than at that point. I don't think I questioned it as much on that drive as I did the later drives.
Yeah, I think that's the final takeaway. Is a lot of people question the play calling and said, you can't play conservative. This is Ohio State. You really get one chance on the road, and you did. This season is defined by this game. Unfortunately, it was a loss, and now the College Football Committee is starting to define Penn State's season by it. So we're just going to go 1 through 7. We'll stop at Penn State. We can debate the other teams in the future. Just know that Wisconsin and Miami are getting their due credit by not being ranked in the top 4 as they're starting to push. Especially Wisconsin's pushing the top 4 in the AP poll. But the college football rankings are more accurate at this point. Georgia got ranked number 1. Surprised a lot of people. Alabama number 2. Notre Dame number 3. Clemson at number 4. Oklahoma at number 5, Ohio State at 6, Penn State at 7. Tommy, what stands out to you from those top 7 teams?
The fact that Georgia is above Alabama surprised me at first. I've been listening to a lot of people talk about it, and it's not that big of a deal in my mind. I think Alabama is the best team in the league, and that's in the nation, and that's not really up for all that up for debate. Georgia is a fantastic team as well. They deserve to be number 2, but I think they did that just because it's interesting. They're both undefeated. If Georgia loses a game, then obviously they won't be number 1, but I still see them in the top 4. They're just that talented of a team. Notre Dame jumping up to 3. Doesn't surprise me that much with the teams that they've played. Clemson at 4, I know that you have a lot to say about this. That's the biggest question mark that I have. Oklahoma above Ohio State, I understand. Penn State at 7. I was expecting them to be lower than that just because of how biased they seem to be against Penn State. They always, I don't know. That might also be the fact that I'm biased for Penn State, but I always feel like Penn State gets the short stick in the poll. What did you want to say about Clemson?
Clemson's definitely not a top 4 team. What the committee said about Clemson is that their defense is great. They have some quality top wins. They do. I think they've beaten 5 or 6 winning Power 5 conference teams. But some of those wins, they just didn't really, I like the Virginia Tech win. That was a good win. They beat Auburn too. But that loss to Syracuse, I know that Kelly Bryant went down in that game, but if this defense is so great, like everyone says, why did they allow 27 points to the Syracuse team? Granted, they were on the road, but I feel like you could have done the job with a high school recruit. This is Syracuse. They're not that great of a team. Okay, that's obviously a stretch, but I feel like Clemson's backup QB would have been good enough and their running game to, withstand Syracuse. They were losing, like you mentioned before we started the podcast. They were losing to Syracuse before Bryant went down, and that's just the fact of the matter. So I think Clemson should be in Penn State's spot, but I don't think Penn State should be in Clemson's spot. They are not a top 4 team right now. They did lose. Top 4 teams don't blow 18-point leads, at least as of right now. They don't. Maybe Penn State can change that by absolutely beating down the teams that they have remaining, Michigan State being the toughest, but we'll get into that later. As far as who's going to replace them at 4, Ohio State. Ohio State beat the number 2 Penn State team at the time, exposing a number 1 scoring defense and a top 10 total defense. I think that is very impressive no matter what venue you're at. Coming back from an 18-point deficit late in the fourth quarter, I think that's a great job. The number 2 offense proved to be what it was, even though they were playing some weaker opponents at the time, but they figured it out. So Ohio State gets that number 4 spot for me. Number 5 would be Penn State, because here's why I don't like Penn State at 7. Penn State lost by 1 point on the road to a team that they were underdogs to by 6.5 points. How is that a bad loss? How is putting up 38 points against a team that was favored by 6.5 a bad loss on the road? So it really doesn't make sense to me. I think 7's, a little harsh. That's just me. But logically looking at it, Ohio State, the only reason they were at 6 is because they weren't beating really quality teams in the Big Ten. That's just the way the schedule was. That loss to Oklahoma early in the season looked bad because it was 2 touchdowns in the horseshoe, but that's really about it. And then I would rank Oklahoma at 6 after Penn State because losing to Iowa State, and at one point they were losing to Iowa State bad, but it ended up being within a touchdown. Baylor was beating Oklahoma, and they had to come back and defeat them. Baylor almost knocked them off. Matt Rule taking that job out of Baylor. So a lot of tight games for them that don't make a lot of sense. I don't know how good Oklahoma is. I think that was a lot of passion in that Ohio State game. As far as, are they the better team? No, they aren't. I think that was just a bit of passion. They sang their alma mater. It's the same thing with Ohio State. Why, they stormed the field. They upset us last year. They made our college football playoff run a little bit more difficult. Let's repay the favor. Okay, Oklahoma was saying the same thing when they went to the horseshoe. They sang their alma mater. They, ruined the start of our season. Let's go ruin theirs. So, but, that's why upsets happen. When Syracuse upset Clemson, do I say, oh, well, they're the better team? No, I don't. But these upsets in these games, are telling. And that's why I would put Clemson at 7 after Oklahoma, because Clemson should not, there's no excuse to losing to Syracuse. I don't care if your starting quarterback get hurt. The program that they are and the recruiting that Dabo Swinney has done, you mean to tell me that your backup quarterback and the rest of your starting team can't beat a Syracuse team? So that's where I stand. And I am more than happy to argue with friends, peers, sports fans, armchair lovers. I think that's my best argument as far as why it should be Ohio State, Penn State, Oklahoma, and then Clemson. And even TCU. TCU's a good team. They beat Oklahoma State by 2 touchdowns, but this is the Penn State Armchair Podcast, not the TCU Armchair Podcast. So I'll leave it at that. But I think those teams affect Penn State the most right now at the rankings, which is why I had to argue for and against them for that reason. But at 5, I mean, do you like? I mean, what do you think of 7? What do you think of 7, Tommy?
I had said that I was predicting Penn State at 8 or lower just because of the way that Penn State always seems to get the short end of the straw. As I said, Penn State, as you said, they lost by 1 point to a team that they were told they were going to lose to. There was a big upset involved, and that might have knocked them down a little bit just because of the fact that they were leading by so much and then gave that up. That shows some weakness, whether it's physical, endurance weakness, or
injuries.
Yeah, injuries or something like that. But I think at the end of the day, I agree with everything except for the Clemson. And moving past number 7, Wisconsin, just seeing Wisconsin at number 9 frustrates me a little bit because...
Well, who have they beaten? Apparently strength of schedule really matters to them, or else Oklahoma wouldn't be where they are. Ohio State, with their wins, I mean, that's a big deal. That's why Miami's, barely in the top 10. I mean, and Miami's going to get knocked off pretty soon. I will throw that out there. Virginia Tech's going to beat them. That is a good Virginia Tech team. But, the committee knows. The committee knows how to value these wins, but they still show their biases. Like Clemson should not be in the top 4, and I'm actually really surprised that once I started listening to some of the reports that they were going to rank Georgia at number 1, I was like I can reason with that. I won't be like, whoa, I'm in a state of shock. But as far as it goes, I'm okay with the top 10. Definitely not satisfied. I really do think Penn State. It's an okay ranking. I don't think it's fair though. I don't think, under all the circumstances, I feel like the committee just neglected some details and favored some others just for the benefit of their biases or their preferences or their values, rather than coming in totally neutral and saying, all right, if I'm fence sitting for each team, where would I put them? I mean, but, college football is meant to be exciting. It's meant to be controversial. It's meant to make people happy, make them upset. That's the beauty of sports. So... I don't have any more thoughts on the college football play. They're going to update weekly, so we're going to have weekly thoughts about it. So be prepared for my rants and raves, unless Penn State gets back up in there. But it is going to be a tough road because a lot of people are already starting to predict that they're going to have a same Ohio State run that they did last year, where they have to finish 11-1 and just hope that Ohio State, and other teams, end up falling off. There's plenty of teams have difficult games ahead. I don't know about Notre Dame, but I know Alabama's got some tough games ahead. They play Auburn at the end of the season. I know that Clemson's still got a couple more tough games ahead, but outside of that, their schedule's not really too tough. Notre Dame, as a matter of fact, does have, thank you for pulling that up for me, Tommy. Notre Dame has Miami. Miami is a good team, but I don't know if I see them as top 10. And they do play Stanford.
Yeah, the Miami game against Notre Dame is going to be the biggest one for them. If they lose that one,
I think Stanford will be. I think Stanford will be a bigger one because Stanford and Notre Dame have played so many years, and Miami, just looking at, they almost lost to UNC. They just, Mark Richt and them, they have a good program, and I think they're going to be good for the future. But this team they could finish 9-3. They could lose 3 in a row, and I would be like, I don't want to say I told you so, but Miami's just, they're begging for an upset. It was the same thing with Michigan State. I'm like, Michigan State is not this good. They're begging to be upset. And then, boom, Indiana almost knocks them off. And then, boom, Northwestern does it. I knew Northwestern was going to do that. So, like I said, Penn State is going to wipe the floor with Michigan State, and I think that's a good pivot to get into that topic. So Michigan State coming in at number 24.
Getting back into Penn State
talk. Getting back into actual Penn State talk. Penn State traveling to East Lansing. They are going to play at noon on Fox. And right now, Penn State's the favorite. They open up, as the Vegas favorite. And why not? This team's angry. This team still prepares very well. I think that the fact that they went into the Horseshoe and put up 38 points and every which way, defensively, offensively, special teams. They hit Ohio State from every part of the triangle and put up 38 points. I still think that's impressive, so it's still not a total loss. I think that's still very respectable. It shows how good this team is and how they prepare and improve, even after turning around from a good Michigan team and pivoting to Ohio State. I mean, that is pretty tough. Michigan, even though they lost 42-13, they still play it tough. So Michigan State comes in 6-2, 4-1 in conference. Their lone loss comes to at Northwestern. They did beat Michigan, which is why they're ranked. And they also lost to Notre Dame earlier in the season, so Notre Dame gets a little more street cred, which is why they're number 3. Michigan State, I want you to tell me about them a little more, Tommy. But the first thing that comes to mind is defense under head coach Mike D'Antoni and L.J. Scott. L.J. Scott is an amazing running back. They're the classic ground and pound team. The last Michigan State quarterback that I can remember is Connor Cook, and before that Kirk Cousins. But they said they've really had kind of a carousel since Connor Cook's been off the team for a few years now.
Yeah, I believe Le'Veon Bell also went to Michigan State.
He did. So they're good at producing. I mean, there was Javon Ringer. I can remember back those mid-2000 years, early 2000 teens. And that's Michigan State's forte. It's defense, good running game, pretty much the staple of the Big Ten. But going more, how's Penn State going to attack Michigan State this weekend?
Well, not only are they angry and motivated to win this game, but Michigan State's ranked 24. You said that's because they beat Michigan. Penn State absolutely destroyed Michigan. That's why Michigan's no longer ranked. So that's a problem for Penn State just because of the fact that it no longer counts as a ranked win, even though they were ranked, or it might not, depending on who you talk to. If Penn State beats Michigan State, they will also likely not be ranked anymore, which could be a problem, but also it's another team that was ranked when you played, and if you beat them well enough, winning a game by a large margin is a feat in and of itself. So the fact that they have L.J. Scott, but he was
suspended.
Yeah.
And was suspended against Northwestern, so that might have factored into their loss.
I haven't seen that many games other than that game where Michigan State has played incredibly well. There have been a couple of games where that's been low scoring. That might be due to their defense, but I think it was Indiana they played this past week. And
it was a low-scoring game.
Yeah, neither team put up 20 points. It was very muddy and rainy in that game, but then again, that's what it was like for Penn State, Ohio State. You don't know what's going to happen. These two teams are coming back. Penn State is I wouldn't say they have their tails between their legs, but they're coming out there and they're going to be vicious because they don't want
they have to prove to the committee. Yeah, they have to prove to the
Exactly.
committee with these 3 weaker opponents that they're still a top 4 team. And it's tough. They need to shut out Rutgers and they need to shut out Nebraska and they need to put a lot of points on this Michigan State defense because that is their forte. Offensively, 23 points per game, 19 points per game on defense from Michigan State's perspective. If I'm the Spartans, how do I do the unthinkable, the improbable, and upset the Nittany Lions? Where do I hit them at their weakest point?
The offensive line.
Okay.
Really, if you have a good defensive line, I don't know Michigan State as well as Ohio State or Michigan or the other big teams, but with Penn State's offensive line, it's been their weak point all year. It's been their weak point for many years. This year, they have a better offensive line than they have before, but as we said earlier with Ohio State, there are some injuries there now. If Will Fries continues to play at left tackle, and he's a fantastic player, but that's not his position. He's on the right side. I think he's a right tackle or a right guard by trade, and Ryan Bates still isn't there. He and McMahon, who is also injured at the beginning of the year, those two are the staples of the offensive line. If they're both gone or they're both hampered by an injury, it's going to be a real problem for Trace McSorley. It's going to be a problem for Saquon Barkley. And Saquon Barkley really needs to show up in this game again. He's going to want to, not necessarily he needs to, because he has had so many Heisman moments already. But after the mediocre performance, besides the 97-yard kick return touchdown and another rushing touchdown later in the game, he is looking for another game where he puts up 100 yards rushing and receiving. He gets a couple scores. He has another one of those Heisman moments because J.T. Barrett is creeping up on him a little bit. Bryce Love is creeping up on him a little bit. He's still number one, but he's going to come out there and he's really going to want to show off. and Trace McSorley is going to want to hit his targets as well. And everyone out there is going to be, as I've said, just doing as much as they can to prove that Penn State is or deserves to be where they were the week before at number 2.
And as much as you focus on offense, basically you're saying the offense is the X factor for Penn State. I'm going to flip the coin and say that the defense really needs to step up. That was brutal. The offense, granted, they were held under 300 yards.
I assume they were held under 300 points.
But under 300 yards at the Horseshoe, a lot of scores came from short yardage fields set up by the defense and the nice kick return by Saquon Barkley, one of those Heisman moments, as you mentioned. So I think the defense needs to step up. I think the X factor is Brent Pry. Even though this is a weaker Michigan State offense, you are going on the road for the second consecutive week against a quality team. You don't just beat Michigan in Michigan. Yes, they're in the same state, but going to the Big House is definitely different being outside of your own stadium. So with that being said, I think that the defense really needs to step up. I think this is, can they hold them to single digits? And I'm going to say they do. I think that Michigan State has a terrible day on offense, and they're going to set up a lot of good opportunities for the Penn State defense is going to set up a lot of good opportunities for Barkley to get multiple touchdowns, for McSorley to look like a quality quarterback. And I really hope they get Gesicki back involved again, because when I watched him in that Michigan game, watching the highlights, I was like, wow, he won every 50-50 ball. Why didn't they do that against Ohio State? They tried, but McSorley just missed him a little bit. Just give him more of a chance. Don't try to force it there. So I think that it shouldn't be overlooked because it is Michigan State. It is a good defense. It's Big Ten competition. That's how Iowa happened. That's good. They're a good quality team with a solid defense at home. So I don't want to look over this Michigan State game, but this motivation, the burning in their hearts, I think that Penn State does get the easy victory. Tommy, what's your prediction?
I agree. I don't see Michigan State showing up, or not that they don't show up, but they aren't able to put up that many points. I see with Ohio State, the length or the streak of no first quarter points was given up. Ohio State kicked a field goal. I don't see Michigan State putting up any points in the first quarter. I don't see them putting up over 20 points. Only one team in Ohio State has done that so far in I don't know how many games. That's going back to last season. There were only 2 or 3 games that happened, and this was the first one this season. I don't see them being able to do that. As you said, Penn State is going to really change or work on the things that they didn't do. They're going to stick to what they believe in, what their identity is. They're going to work on the cornerback specifically. Pass defense was something that really tore them up last week, and helping to raise their awareness, helping to get the hands in the right spots, preventing preventable penalties. All of those things are going to be really key moving on later into the season. And if Penn State can win this game, I don't see them losing the confidence or losing any of the following games.
So what's your score prediction?
Somewhere between Penn State 35-40 and Michigan State somewhere between 7 and 14. I don't see them scoring more than 2 touchdowns in this game.
So you're thinking the same thing I am here. I think the defense is really going to crack down. I think Michigan gets 6. I think they get 2 field goals, and I think Penn State's going to put up I think they're going to put up 41. 41-6 is my prediction. The last time I said this, Iowa came out and put, really hit them where it hurts, but I think it's because Penn State wasn't expecting that. They have to show off, they have to flex. They are upset. If they beat Ohio State, I'd actually be a little more concerned about this game, but the way the motivation rolls, I think that Penn State gets this one done with at least a 30-point advantage. So I think that's going to do it for us at Armchair Penn State. Zach Seiko and Tommy Butler bringing you that 10th episode on Sermon on Mount Nittany podcast. But before we go, we have some big news from Armchair as a whole.
Wait, there's more.
Yeah, but wait, there's more. If you act now, no. If we act now, and since we do, those who can, they do. That's what we do. And Penn State and Armchair is partnering with Google. Armchair has been selected as one of the top 10 companies to be in this new small startup promotional role. So Armchair and Google are going to be working together to help promote the site and just develop it, and hopefully it starts to, gain more traction, gain more followers, and we're going to work just as hard, if not harder, to get the best quality content to not just people in the Penn State section, but all across Armchair, from pro to collegiate to fantasy to betting to soccer, hockey, everything you can imagine. And I'm excited.
So am I. We hope that you decide to tell your friends and let us know what we can do to improve, and then continue that streak so that we're giving you what you want to hear. Not necessarily exactly what you want to hear, depending on what the news is, but the way you want to hear it. So, I guess.
And if you want to hear what you want to hear, don't be afraid to apply. If you have a special, unique voice and you want it to be heard, Armchair is the platform to do it. That's what we hire. That's what we seek out. So that's going to do it for us on the Penn State side of things. We'll catch you next week after Penn State beats Michigan State.